Win in advance or warning sign? We talk Michigan football here at the Voice of College Football. We got Clayton Safey on the line from the Wolverine to discuss Michigan, Wisconsin. Hey, Clayton.
Hey, how's it going? Big week.
Yeah, big week. This one's been circled for quite some time. Wisconsin only 1-2, but hey, I've watched them play the important games, and they're much better than that. I think that they probably have a top 5 to 10 defense in the country.
Yes.
So Michigan and Wisconsin. But before we get to that, it's always good to beat Ohio State, and that was accomplished on Tuesday.
Yeah, so Michigan winning out on the recruiting trail this time against Ohio State. Kenneth Grant, a 3-star defensive tackle out of Merrillville, Indiana. One of the more underrated prospects in the country, will probably get a bump here in some of the next updates. And, you know, if national guys come out to see him for once, he is a massive guy at 6'5", 340 pounds. So it's a big get for Michigan, figuratively and literally, for the future, the middle of that defense. And the hats off goes to Sean Nua, Michigan's defensive line coach, who has taken some heat for some recruiting struggles in the past. Some of the guys he's landed on the defensive line, he's needed some help with and connections with from other staff members. But this was all Sean Nua, and he did a great job closing. He was actually at Grant's game on Friday night, hitting the road and driving 3-4 hours to go down there, showing him that he was a priority, was able to seal the deal, and he committed right before practice. And we hear the Michigan staff was pretty fired up. So, like you said, always good to beat Ohio State on the recruiting trail. But more importantly, getting a guy like this in the middle of your defense, and they've defensive tackle has been a spot that they've tried to prioritize over the last couple cycles because they've been a little thin there and a little small. And with this new defense moving to a 3-4, you need some big bodies, and Kenneth Grant is certainly that.
Kenneth Grant with 15 offers, including, as Clayton mentions, Ohio State, also Wisconsin and Arizona State in the 2022 class. Clayton Safey on the line from the Wolverine discussing Michigan. Of course, the Wolverines back into Big Ten play after the opening win against Rutgers last week at home. We go to Wisconsin, not the best place of Michigan football play here in the last 20 years. Of course, they don't play Wisconsin every year, so it's not a every other year loss by any stretch, but the last few trips have not been kind in particular. All right, much has been made of the struggles of the offense in the second half against Rutgers. They did what they typically do to opponents in the first half. They bludgeoned them with a run. They had some key passes across the middle, a lot of crossing routes over the middle to wide open targets that took it for explosive pass plays in the first half. Then it pretty much bogged down with a ton of 3-and-outs and not many yards gained there in the second half.
Yeah, it was a tale of two halves. It was almost like a completely different game. The feeling at halftime in the stadium, and a lot of the students left. You kind of had that feeling that this was going to be another Michigan victory where they're just rolling here and, thinking, okay, the backups will come in at a certain point in the second half, like we've seen over the last few weeks. They'll rest up a little bit before they go and play a physical game against Wisconsin, who, by the way, had just finished up a super physical game against Notre Dame. So all that was good. But then, as you mentioned, 4 straight 3-and-outs to start the second half. They accumulated 42 total yards in that entire half. The defense also was, bent a little bit, and Rutgers was able to put some drives together. They ended up outgaining Michigan when it was all said and done. So, yeah, on the offensive side, it was a complete struggle. Cade McNamara was pressured a couple times and looked a little uncomfortable in the pocket, even though that offensive line, for the most part, has given him plenty of time to throw. He missed on a couple, balls. There was a drop, and they just weren't able to get in sync at all. And those 3-and-outs really piled up. But from a defensive perspective, the positions they were put in, which were terrible, when you look at both field position and the fact that they were only getting 3 plays off in between drives and then having to go back on the field. But, getting a couple red zone stops, stopping Rutgers on 2 4th downs in the second half, one right at the end of the third quarter and then another in the fourth quarter, and then coming up with the fumble to win the game when Rutgers had the ball, driving to tie it there at the end with just under 2 minutes to go. You can't say enough about the way this defense played. So that's the positive. The negative is basically everything about the offense in that game, including the way Cade McNamara looked. And Michigan is just hoping right now that that was more of an anomaly than anything, and that they can play the way they did, I guess, the first 7 halves of the season as opposed to that 8th one. And we'll see. They have their work cut out for them this week against the Wisconsin defense that, you mentioned it, this is a 1-2 team, but their 2 losses have come to top 10 teams, and that defense has really been put in bad spots themselves from a, really bad offense so far. And it's going to be a stiff challenge for this Michigan offense if they want to bounce back.
Yeah, the Wisconsin defense racked up 6 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, held Notre Dame under 300 yards total offense. So I watched the game. For anyone watching the game, they know that it wasn't a 41-13 game. It was actually a Wisconsin lead early in the 4th quarter, and it just got out of hand. Graham Mertz threw 4 interceptions, 2 picks, pick sixes, and it was not a 41-13 game by any stretch. Wisconsin's defense was there and rushing the passer and gave up 3 yards rushing. So it was a Michigan offense in the second half that we had asked the question earlier, Clayton, at what point was the Michigan rushing attack going to meet someone that could stop them? Well, they ran it in the first half. Rutgers stopped them in the second half. Wisconsin, you would think at this point, has a better rush defense than Rutgers. It'll be interesting to see how Michigan counters if they're not able to run the ball. And maybe if I don't know if it's been addressed in regards to a quarterback change and how close J.J. McCarthy is to seeing the field in meaningful time.
Yeah, so there's a lot there. So the rushing offense, really, when you take out that first drive, which you can't take out, but the first drive of the game was 17 plays. It went over 7.5 minutes, and 15 of those were rushes. And they weren't going for long plays or long runs as you would expect with 15 runs. A lot of them were moving the chains, getting 4 or 5 yards. So Michigan really didn't run a ton throughout that entire game, and Cade McNamara threw for 156 yards in the first half and looked good. So I think you have to point that out as well, that, the run offense really struggled basically the entire game. It was still under 4 yards a carry in that first half all total. So how close is Michigan to making a change at quarterback? I don't think they're particularly, right on the edge. I think maybe they thought about it, and J.J. McCarthy was warming up in that second half, but I think you figure you stick with Cade McNamara, just because he wasn't really the only one struggling in that half against Rutgers. They had to get the run game going as well. You saw him get one to kind of, finally get that first down, hitting the edge on one to Blake Corum. So there were a lot of struggles in that game. And I personally, there's been a lot of talk about the quarterback stuff. I don't think this would be the week to do it when you go in and play a team like Wisconsin that not only is one of the better defenses in the country, but with the way they play, the way that they have, played against Michigan over the last couple of years, to put him in that atmosphere as his first start, I think would be a disservice to him. Now, am I ruling it out? If Cade McNamara struggles, absolutely not, because I think that, they're going to try to win this game by any means. And if they feel like, they can't do it with him in there after a quarter or two or whatever it is, then I wouldn't be surprised. But I don't think there's a controversy yet. It's been, Cade McNamara has done a great job, doing what they've asked him to do all season long. Hasn't thrown an interception in his entire career in 124 throws. So, they're kind of placing that at a premium right now as well, trying to lean on the run. But as you mentioned, I think Michigan's going to have to air it out in this game to win. And, they're not going to be able to run the ball necessarily super effectively on this Wisconsin defense. You look at the way Notre Dame did it, they didn't even have a ton of success doing it, but, throwing for nearly 250 yards, being able to really only move the ball with the pass game. Wisconsin might stack the box, try to stop this Michigan run. It comes down to, can the receivers get open in one-on-one coverage, and can Cade McNamara find them in, some man coverage down the field? We haven't seen a ton of that from the Michigan offense so far this season because they haven't really been stopped in the run game until last week. So it's still a question mark. I think I said it last week. Until I actually see it, I think they certainly can do it, but until I see it, it's still going to be a question mark, and it's going to be something where they're going to have to prove.
It's a good point about the turnover rate and the success Cade McNamara's had there, because I think the analytics would prove out that most of the time throwing for 150 yards with no picks is more effective than throwing for 300 yards with 2 picks, for example. Right. Just because of field position, putting your defense in a bad place. There are only a number of possessions, especially the way Michigan plays football and the combination of Michigan and Rutgers on the same field in particular, and Wisconsin now, a lot of teams in the Big Ten, the possessions are crucial, and the turnover battle is going to be won by the winning team most of the time. And right now you've got a quarterback who's turning it over at an alarming rate in Graham Mertz. Yes. And you've got another quarterback, Cade McNamara, who, despite the criticism of him not turning it over, and in a game like this where both defenses are stout and both running games are what is relied on offensively, you got to think that the turnovers are always crucial, but in this one, crucial to the hilt. And again, Graham Mertz is turning it over all over the place with 4 picks last week. And this has been going on for the last 7, 8, 9 games with him. When we look at Michigan's running game, as you say, not explosive in the first half, still effective moving the chains, the one long drive, a couple long touchdown drives. I got to think that they're going to continue to be, and when I say stubborn, this is not a criticism. Basically, you can view it as being stubborn. You can view it as this is identity, and every fan clamors for his team to have an identity, and Michigan certainly has it. You got to think that despite Wisconsin's success on defense and despite their reputation, that Michigan's still going to stick to what they do until they have to counter that.
Yeah, until they have to counter that, I think, is the key there. I don't think Michigan is, if they're running into the teeth of that Wisconsin defense and, they're getting 0, 1, 2 yards a pop, I don't think they're going to hesitate to go away from that. I think there's more out of this passing offense than we've seen. We've been told to stay tuned on that front in terms of, what exactly they're not showing. And I think this would be the game to show it. Definitely. And when you look at that Rutgers second half as well, I mean, one of those 3 and outs were 3 straight passing plays called. So, it's not like they were, super stubborn in that, aspect. I thought some of the run plays they ran were stubborn. I mean, I didn't love, Blake Corum up the middle on a 3rd and 12. I thought that was a little ridiculous, but that was kind of one of the first couple drives of the half. And I honestly think it was a little bit of complacency out of the play calling, which you can't have. And you got to keep the foot on the gas pedal there. And then I think they later realized that this was going to be a little more of a game than they bargained for earlier. So I think this would be the week where we see Mike fell there, but this would be the week where we see the passing offense get opened up a little bit, because this is a Wisconsin team coming in that, you expect that you're not going to be able to run all over them. I mean, I think it'd be a big success if Michigan ran for 100 yards on them. I mean, that'd be huge. I mean, they've been allowing 23 rushing yards a game over the last 3, and those are the good teams, as we mentioned. Notre Dame's running backs, although, they don't have a good offensive line, those running backs are fantastic. And, Michigan has a couple backs themselves that are pretty good. So I expect them to try to run, but I don't think it's going to be, too quick of take too long for them to say, hey, we gotta start throwing here, because Wisconsin, Faion Hicks, their best cornerback, is questionable for this game as well. I think you can exploit them a little bit downfield.
Yeah, and Michigan, if you look at the pass plays, pretty explosive there, 18 yards per catch plus against Rutgers, 16 plus per reception over the course of the season. And if you didn't see the game against Rutgers, watch the extended highlights, and you see that a lot of crossing routes, guys in space. Then of course, especially at the end of the first half, there's a 51-yarder, a 38-yarder in there. Yep. Where they opened it up and were able to. My concern there is that all those plays were in the first half, and Rutgers countered that and made adjustments at halftime, apparently, and Michigan wasn't able to then. Either they thought they had the game in hand and could just lean on the defense, or were unable to counter the halftime adjustments and create some offense in the second half.
Well, yeah, there's no question that it was a struggle in that second half. So, yeah, me saying I think they're going to open it up doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be successful. I think that's why it's such a big question going forward is, can they execute that? I expect them to have a little more rhythm than they did in those first few drives of the second half, where you're going to be able to do some different things. I mean, they had 12 plays run on offense through a quarter and a half of that second half. So once you get one or two to hit, once you can move the chains one or two times and keep them guessing a little bit more, I think it'll be a different story. But again, it's a tougher defense you're playing. So there's no question that there's some big concerns coming out of that second half. I guess you hope they were just out of sync and it was one miss here, one miss there that, had them going 3 and out if you're, Michigan. But I think that maybe it was a wake-up call as well for the coaching staff, knowing that, hey, we got to be able to have a couple plays we can go to when we need to move the chains when things are a little bit stagnant.
Got Clayton Safey on the line from the Wolverine. Please check out his work and the rest of the staff there at the Wolverine. Clayton Safey joins us on a regular basis to break down the Maize and Blue. They are 4-0, and they dive into their second Big Ten game, their first one on the road at Wisconsin. And, there's a reason that this game is basically a pick 'em. It's somewhere in the 1 to 2 point range on either side. It's flip-flop back and forth, I think, a few times, but basically it's a pick 'em game. On the Michigan side, you have a team that's taking care of the football, that's running it down most people's throats, that's playing staunch defense. They've been more successful, obviously, than Wisconsin in the win-loss category, and there's reason to favor Michigan in this one, taking care of the football. Wisconsin playing two really good teams in Penn State, Notre Dame. And if you look past the box score or the final score, played them down to the wire pretty much. Got to be one of the best defenses in the country. Home field advantage and one of the better home fields in college football. But on the downside, turning the ball over like crazy and not really, we're used to Wisconsin not displaying a prolific passing attack, but it's usually effective. It's usually effective in play action. It's usually it doesn't turn the ball over. And number two, they usually have a devastating ground game. Their ground game is pretty marginal this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a different type of Wisconsin team. It's similar to what we saw last year with the offense that struggled, except against Michigan, who couldn't stop anything in that game and allowed, 350 rushing yards, and they didn't even need to throw a pass, and 49 points. So it's interesting because they don't have the Jonathan Taylor or one of those great backs that they've had over the years. The offensive line hasn't really been that good. I mean, when you talk to some guys on the Wisconsin side of things who cover that team, they talk about the offensive line as a concern. Defensively, though, it might be one of Jim Leonard's best crews on that side of the ball, in spite of the positions they're put in by their offense. I think people are looking at Wisconsin and saying they don't deserve to be favored in this game. But then you look at Michigan's history against Wisconsin, some question marks after the Rutgers game. Maybe they don't deserve to be favored. You've seen the bettors go back and forth. You've seen the line flip-flop, as you mentioned, 1.5 one way, 1.5 the other way. I'd say it is about a pick 'em. It's about a 50-50. If I had to predict this game right now, and I haven't even settled on, final score or whatever, you can stay tuned for our staff picks at thewolverine.com. But I'm basically split and have gone back and forth a couple times. I think I would lean with Wisconsin winning this game right now. I think Michigan might be the better team, but I think this matchup favors the Badgers a little bit in that they can stop the run, and that's really what Michigan's shown on offense that they want to do. And the fact that, I think that Michigan has struggled to stop Wisconsin's run game. It wasn't a great run game last year, but Michigan struggled to stop it until they prove me they can't. They can shut that down. Then I think I'm going to give a slight edge to Wisconsin. But I think it's going to be a close game, Mark. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game as well, and something like 17-13 or 13-10. The over/under is 43.5. I would lean towards the under there.
I was trying to scurry through the scores through the years to see how many games we're talking about going back to 2001 not winning at Camp Randall.
Is it 5 or 7?
Yeah, it's not many. I wasn't able to make it through. It's only 3 since 2008. So it's probably 5. That sounds about right. So we're not talking about, again, these teams don't play every year, number one. Number two, of course, They don't play in one venue. So people see 2001 and they're like, oh, yeah, it's 5 games. It's still.
And it's been a while since Wisconsin's won at Michigan before last year anyway, as well. So it's been a series that has really especially in the first few years of the Jim Harbaugh era, especially, has been won by the home team. It kind of feels like it's such a physical matchup each year that the two teams play that, you kind of get that juice from the crowd. And, you saw that in 2016 with Michigan winning a tight one, 2017, Wisconsin bouncing back, and then Michigan wins in blowout fashion at home in 2018. Then you had the last couple of years, home team wins in 19, and then Wisconsin picks up a road victory in 2020 in front of no fans. So I think the home crowd is big in this one as well, something you got to mention. That's why I think this line will probably settle at Wisconsin, or stay at Wisconsin being favored by, a point and a half.
I know that it's not been the best of seasons for you thus far. I still think this is one of the best teams in the Big Ten. I still think it's a top 15 team in the country, but the record doesn't show it, and jeopardy of falling to 1-3 here. So the Penn State game was a game in which Wisconsin dominated the first half, let a couple big plays go in the second half, turned the ball over like crazy, especially in the red zone. Then we saw a different version of that against Notre Dame. People across the country will see 41-13, but I watched it all the way through, and it was a competitive game until about 5-6 minutes left. And again, man, when you get a defense that gets 6 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, holds the opponent under 300 yards total offense, 3 yards rushing, you expect to win those games, and here they're giving up 41 points. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, it's unfortunate right now. This defense is playing like when I think you look at it, Georgia and Wisconsin, I think have the two best defensive units overall in the country. They played about as close to perfect as they could play this past Saturday, and still were on the losing end by a wide margin. And then that comes down to either pick sixes that get taken back, or special teams touchdown, and then or just turning the ball over and putting the defense in a spot where it's really hard to hold up their end of the bargain because they're in negative territory from the jump. So I don't like to say a wasted unit, but right now you're looking at a team that, with this defense, if they get manageable offensive play, just hanging on to the football, they should really be and could be a 3-0 football team. But when you're turning it over left and right, that puts you in a tough spot to win games against high quality competition. Penn State and Notre Dame are solid teams that Wisconsin very well could have beat, but they were on the losing side, and now they try to right the ship against another tough test in a Michigan team that has looked really solid so far this season.
So Tyler, before we get to the other side and try to fix some issues, we'll focus on the defense while we've got them. What makes this unit so good? It's not like it's an aberration from most Wisconsin defenses, but this may be a vintage one before it's all said and done.
Yeah, this unit has been really good. I think the big difference this year is that they're starting to get a little bit more pressure. Last couple of years, the sack numbers have been down, the tackle for loss numbers have been down. They finally now have a group that, Jim Leonhard's defense is predicated on the defensive line, Keanu Benton up front, eating up blocks, opening lanes for the linebackers. And so far, he's done an amazing job to do that. The first 2 games, one of their best linebackers, Leo Chenal, was out due to COVID, but he was back. He played really well this past Saturday against Notre Dame. So I think that's the big difference, is that this defensive line and the front 7 really are getting to the quarterback and making plays. They had 6 sacks against Notre Dame, but really with Kyron Williams was an amazing pass blocker. If he wasn't in that game, Wisconsin could have racked up double-digit sacks in that one. So that's been the big thing, that when Jim Leonhard's defense is humming and working, it's because they're getting pressure on the quarterback, and that's going to be what they'll have to try and do once again this next upcoming Saturday.
Folks, please like the video. Share these videos out on social media, because if you enjoy the conversation, others will as well. So if you share the videos, people understand that we're here talking college football every day. Tyler, let's look at the offense now. Okay, Graham Mertz is turning the ball over like crazy. Just your thoughts about his play, where it stands right now. Are there other viable options? Are those being discussed?
Yeah, so his play has been relatively poor since you saw the Illinois game to open the season last year. Came out on fire, and since then has been kind of a steady decline to almost a very low point this past week. Of course, everyone knows highest rated quarterback Wisconsin's ever got, but right now it just is not clicking. Last year there was, I was one of the guys that was a little bit of a Graham Mertz apologist. There's a lot of outside factors going on. We expected this year to come out and be much cleaner, and it's almost taken an even bigger nosedive. So I think right now confidence is something he's probably struggling with. I noticed in the Penn State game, his footwork just seemed to be all sorts of off, kind of aiming the ball, just trying to get it out of his hands. Really seems like a one read type of kid right now, where it's just if his first read's not there, he's just trying to get out of the pocket or get rid of it, or forcing it into spaces where it's not going to be. So you wouldn't expect those situations to pop up with, of course, Paul Chryst taking the play calling back over, and he is the quarterback coach. They don't have a designated quarterback coach on the staff right now. So it's really, I think, in terms of other options, I think it's either ride or fall with Graham Mertz. The backup is Chase Wolf. He's older than Mertz, has played a little bit, but I believe he's got 12 career passing attempts, and 3 of them have been intercepted. So I think right now you're in a situation where you're gonna stick with Mertz and hope that he gets back to that Illinois level, or at least close to it, and in some sort of form, and just hanging on to the football. But it's going to be a work in progress throughout this year. Other options besides those two, you've got a fifth-year walk-on guy that has really never really played, and then a true freshman that just enrolled this fall. Wisconsin didn't take a quarterback in the class between Mertz and him, so I think right now you're either you're rising with Mertz back up, or you're just rolling with him through the punches so far this season.
Tyler, because of the reputation built through the years, I think we all assume that the offensive line's great. We assume that they're developing NFL players up front. We assume that the running game's devastating. There's been Jonathan Taylor most recently, even before that, sometimes layers of NFL running backs, not just one guy that's prolific. And we see Ches Malusi, the incoming transfer, has taken the job and most of the carries from Clemson. How would you rate the offensive line? Again, not looking through Wisconsin glasses as, oh, this is always great, a given, as it's an NFL factory at those two positions, but as what it is right now, how would you rate the running game?
I would say it's an okay run game right now, but not up to Wisconsin, usual standards. I think it's a good way to put it. Up front with the offensive line has been kind of a head scratcher. They've almost done almost like a hockey rotation with the offensive line. I mean, 3-4 guys at a time, sometimes rotating in and playing a lot of different guys. And I kind of understood that, the first week, if you liked a couple guys, second week you had Eastern Michigan, you want to get some guys some reps, then you go into a bye week. But they did the same kind of rotation against Notre Dame. And I just think, from conversations we've had, we had a former offensive lineman on our podcast to kind of talk about that. He said, it's difficult to get in a rhythm doing that, and coming in and out of a game is tough. So I'm kind of, I guess Wisconsin fans, I think overall are frustrated by that, because you want to see which 5 guys are going to be able to open this run game up, because right now the passing game is just somewhat non-existent. So you have to have that strong run game. I have really liked what I've seen from Ches Malusi in terms of the tailback position. Everybody thought it was going to be him and Jalen Berger, who played a lot last year, splitting carries, but it's been Malusi by a wide margin, and Jalen Berger's really gotten not much run at all throughout this season. So that one was a little bit of a surprise, but Malusi's ran well. If the offensive line can settle on 5-6 guys that they like and get things moving, I think they have a fighting chance. But I think that unit still has to find some improvements to really take this team to where they want to go.
You can track Tyler's work there on the banner, buckysfifthquarter.com on SB Nation. But you also mentioned your podcast, Tyler. We want to make sure that people know where to find you there.
Yeah, so that'll be under the same Bucky's Fifth Quarter umbrella. We'll tweet out the link. We have a new one coming out on Thursday to preview this Michigan game. So our handle is at B5Q over there on Twitter. So if you're looking for that, we'll have that out Thursday morning.
I don't like to overemphasize the quarterback position. We all know it's the most important position, but sometimes I think it gets overemphasized. There's 22 guys on the field all the time. I think the most important unit on the field is many times the offensive line as a unit, but as an individual player, quarterback. In this game, the quarterback's going to be de-emphasized most likely, because I think both teams want to run the ball, and as long as they're running, there's no reason to throw. And they're going to take that, especially that's what we've seen from Michigan. But at the same time, because of the egregious number of errors that we've seen against Penn State and Notre Dame, I got to think, I understand why this is a pick'em game. Basically, it's a pick'em game. It's somewhere in that 1 to 2 point range. Wisconsin hasn't lost to Michigan at home since 2001. They've dominated the last 2 games. If you look past the final score, they've played almost down to the wire. Against Penn State, they did. Last 5 minutes against Notre Dame, the defense is arguably one of the best in the country. On the Michigan side, they're winning the games. They're 4-0. They're much better than they were last year. So I get that. It seems to me like Graham Mertz, if he doesn't turn over the football, if somebody told me right now Wisconsin turns it over once or 0, I'm thinking Wisconsin wins this game. And I know the turnover ratio is always important, but it just seems more so that if they take care of the football, they should win the game. If they don't, then we're going to see another close game, but they're most likely going to come up with an L.
Yeah, it's really, you look at Wisconsin, they're not a program that's known for some quarterback play that has lit the world on fire. They've had guys, Alex Hornibrook, Joel Stave before that, guys that just simply manage the game. I don't like the term game manager, but really if you look at Michigan over on the other side with Cade McNamara, completing 62% of his passes, hasn't thrown any interceptions. They haven't fumbled the football. They're 4-0. If Wisconsin, had him or had that same recipe, they're likely sitting here 3-0 with an undefeated top 25 matchup in this game. It's hard to really hard to handicap and know, when these turnovers are going to pop up. That was a big problem in the first one. It was a big problem in Notre Dame, and it's hard to account for those. And also, even a special teams touchdown. Wisconsin special teams have been pretty poor overall in Paul Chryst's tenure, and something that is constantly popped its head up, and you saw it against Notre Dame. So he said in his presser, Paul Chryst did in his presser on Monday, said we're doing things right now that make it hard to win. And if they clean some of those things up, you've got a good enough defense that you can win this game, but it's just more of a matter of wait and see. Maybe they could force some turnovers of their own, but right now, if this offense isn't hanging on to the football, it's going to be hard to be confident in a Badger win. But it does help that they're in Camp Randall. It'll be Barry Alvarez honor day, so that might give them a little spark. But other than that, it really comes down to keeping the ball in their hands and in a positive situation.
And I think people should keep in mind, despite the 2 losses, only one was in conference. Wisconsin's still very much in this thing. You would expect Iowa to be the chief rival and opponent contender in that division. So there's a head-to-head still to be played there. So there's still, it's still, in terms of goals and aspirations within the Big Ten, all right there for Wisconsin to take. Tyler, one last note. We know that you can't say anything definitive about injuries. College football doesn't release anything official, but at the same time, just of note in terms of the secondary and injury issue there.
Yeah, right now, cornerback Faion Hicks, who he's played a lot of football for Wisconsin, played his best game, I think, last week against Notre Dame, played really well. He's banged up and listed as questionable right now. We'll see if he's able to go. Of course, you look at Michigan, they've ran the ball predominantly. They'll probably have to open it up a little bit more against the stout Wisconsin run defense. So you want to have all your best corners available. So we'll see his status throughout the week. But right now, listed as questionable, and I think would be, he's probably Wisconsin's top cover guy. So having him available would be a nice added perk to hopefully give this defense the best shot to play as perfect as they can on Saturday.
Faion Hicks with 5 tackles against Notre Dame, 4 passes defensed, and a quarterback hurry in that game. Tyler, we appreciate you stopping by. Encourage everybody to head on over to Bucky's 5th Quarter on SB Nation, and also check out Tyler's podcast. Should be a good one. Michigan, Wisconsin at Camp Randall on Saturday. Tyler, we appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.